This is the Reluctantly Independent podcast, and this is my interview with Alison Steele, Vice President of Survivors Allied Against Government Abuse. So, you're the Vice President of a group called Survivors Allied Against Government Abuse, and
That's right.
I was wondering if you could just explain a little bit about what the group is and how you became involved.
Okay. Well, our group developed soon after my broadcast aired on TV, on CBC, about the story about my mother being at the Allen Memorial Institute and just what happened to her under the influence of Dr. Cameron and his experiments. After the story was aired, I started receiving large amounts of phone calls from people in the same position as I was in, having their loved ones submitted to the Allen and going through these experiments and coming out, not being, let's say, healthy as they should be after coming out of a hospital that they were supposed to be going into to receive mental health treatments. So, they started contacting me and they wanted to know, my story, and they told me about what happened to their loved ones. So rather than communicating with each one separately, we decided, a few members decided we get together and form a secret Facebook page where we could communicate to each other. And we started having about 15 or 20, 30 members, everybody communicating with each other on the page. So we decided to form a group called Survivors of Victims Allied Against Government Abuse. Being that we were all relatives of these people, and therefore we really didn't have a proper, healthy childhood growing up on account of the fact that our parents or family member was not normal and were not able to treat us. A lot of members had to be sent out to foster homes. Families were split up. Children were, sisters, siblings were split up, not ever getting to know each other till years later. They also had problems with their growing up because of that, etc. So we decided to form the group, and we are currently receiving members. We have about 40 members now participating with our group, and we're about to form a class action suit against the government.
And so, just jumping back a little bit, the circumstances surrounding your mother started in the 1950s, is that right?
1957, my mother was admitted, yes. At that time, let's say in the early 50s or around about that time, it was known to be known that this world-renowned psychiatrist from Scotland, Dr. Ewan Cameron, was coming to Montreal, and he was apparently the guru that could treat all people with mental health issues, mainly being schizophrenia, postpartum depression, things of that nature. And so, it was broadcast, through the media, everything else. And so at that time, many people heard about it. And for example, my grandmother heard about it and my father, and decided that maybe that would be the best place for my mother to go because she was showing signs of postpartum depression after I was born. And before I was born, she had a child, a daughter, who was born with spina bifida. And the child died at 5 months old. And so obviously this was a traumatic experience, for a mother to lose a child. But after that, the doctors said, and everybody said, oh, you should, try again, have another child, try to continue on with your life. That's what she did. And then, like I say, when I was born, I guess, I don't know how it happened, but hormones or whatever, mental health takes over, emotions, traumatic experiences, I don't know, stress. she was showing signs of not being able to care for me, and I was only 2 or so at the time when this started. So when I was 5, that was 1957, that's when my mother was admitted to the hospital. And I then was living with my grandparents because my father had to work, and so I stayed with my grandparents in the city for a few years. So I really don't remember anything about my mother, during those years at all. Well, most people don't remember being under 5 anyway, but what they do say now, and it's very true, I have 3 children of my own, and I'm very aware of this, that the best bond that you can possibly have between a mother and child is in the formative years, between, when they're born to 5 years old. So I never really had that, but, I'm happy to say I had my grandparents, and it could have been a lot worse. So, she was admitted, and she was in for a few months at a time, back and forth, and, she was never the same after that.
So rather than receive the mental health treatment that you and your family thought that she was going to receive, there were some experiments that were conducted in its place. Is that right?
Exactly. So when she was admitted, they had to sign the documents and everything else, and the families were never told what kind of treatments that she would have. They were never told if she was going to be an in-out patient. They weren't told much. So they admitted the patients, and right away when they were admitted, I can't say immediately, but they were put under these treatments. One of the treatments, there were a few. One of the treatments was massive electric shock, where they would strap the person down and put some sort of shock apparatus on their brains and give them zaps, and very, very high doses. I don't really know what the voltage were, but they were enough. And all this was to try to reduce the patient to a childlike state. That was their main goal. They wanted to wipe their brains out from all of the problems or whatever they were experiencing, whatever was going on in them to cause their schizophrenia or depression or whatever. They wanted to erase their minds and be able to program them to a childlike state so that they could rebuild them.
Right. And they used techniques like electroshock therapy, like you mentioned, and they also use things like LSD, as far as I know.
Yes, they used massive doses of LSD, quite a few other barbiturates, Ambisol, I'm not sure the other one, New Ambisol, quite a few very strong drugs. They also put the patient into an insulin-induced coma for weeks or months at a time. My mother was in 2. One was for 27 days and the other, 18 days or something like that. At various times when they were in these comas, they would put headphones on your head to your ears, and there they would play these tapes, which really nobody has any clue as to what they were saying, what the messages were. They were subliminal messages. One person said in an interview that the tape said, you killed your mother, over and over and over again. So I don't know what was said to my mother, but they were playing these tapes over and over again while they were in these comas. And I remember seeing through looking through my mother's files of 300 pages, legal-sized document, double-sided. Needless to say, 2 years ago I read these, and I was floored. The bedside notes documenting everything, how the patient was reacting on certain drugs, because, and if they were too talkative on these drugs, which they said in my mother's case, oh, she's too talkative, she's a little bit more aggressive than usual, dancing in the halls, all these different things. And so then they would take them and give them sleep medication of some sort because they were too hyper. And then they would sleep for maybe a couple of days, and they'd be all drowsy, and some were incontinent. And so they would play around with these drugs, and they would document how they acted on these drugs. And I think that was part of the, let's say, experiments with all of the different medications and whatnot that were being performed. They were all being treated as guinea pigs without their consent. And that's one of the reasons that myself, before, had applied for justice for my mother with the help of a lawyer and won my case. And now, since all of that has aired, many other people are commenting on this, and a lot of people don't even know that this has happened. They don't even know what's gone on in this day and age. The CIA were involved with the Canadian government, and there were many experiments like this done in the United States. I don't really know what to say about that, but people did sue the government for millions, and won, and they paid out millions to these victims. And so now here it's trickled over to Canada, and there were only a few cases before mine that were justified, and the reason why is because these people took on a private lawyer to help them with their cause. But also, I should say, prior to that, there was a class action suit done in the 90s, and my father and many other members of our group had tried to apply to receive compensation at that time. There were media reports, on the radio and in the TV and the newspapers, I should say, about this class action suit, or not a class action suit. It was okay. Wait, I'm just confused on this one right now. What you call it? But it was a formal apology from the government, acknowledging that this was done, and they were going to compensate patients $100,000 each if they applied and sent in their medical records before such and such a date. Apparently, there were maybe 77 people that were granted the compensation.
And you were one of the people that were...
No. My father at that time, he tried, but he missed the deadline.
Oh, I see.
He was trying to get the file from the hospital and everything, and they would never send the complete file. And this is, many people have been saying the same thing. They tried to get their loved ones' files, or they missed the deadline or whatever, and they were refused. Even though the other two patients that did a private suit with the government won, because they were able to hire a lawyer who could prove that these patients, in fact, did have these treatments, and even though it was done it's a while ago, you might say, they should still be eligible. But because of the fact that my father was not able to get compensation, he still continued to write to the members of Parliament. It was the Mulroney government at that time. He's got many letters of refusal. I'm sorry, Mr. Steele, your wife did not receive enough treatments to be eligible for this, etc., etc. So I gave all of this information to my lawyer, and he told me, he said, "No, Alison," he said, "you still have to get the complete medical file." And I said, "Well, I don't know how to get that." I said, "I thought this was all I needed." He said, no, you have to have the medical file from the day your mother was admitted to the hospital until the day she left, so that we could see the treatments that she actually had done to her. So I said, okay. So at that point, I took it upon myself to write to the Department of Justice in Ottawa, Canada, and I told them that I needed to have my mother's files, and a month later they sent them to me.
Well, that must have been a bit of a surprise, eh?
Yes, it sure was. After all this time, and with my father trying, and after all these years, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. So it was very, very special to me. I still have the file kept, and every time I hold it, I think I'm holding my mother. It's really very, very special to me to realize exactly what happened to her. Growing up, I didn't know. I was always angry at my mom, and because she was different, she was eccentric and did these strange things because she wasn't able to cope. They stripped her of her soul, what they did. They erased her emotions, and they erased her memory from, the day I don't know when, she had her memory from growing up as a young child. She would always talk to me about, how she used to do this, go riding, play tennis, enjoy trips with her friends, and she was just a normal, happy-go-lucky young woman. And then, when I talked to her about myself growing up and, the fact that she lost the baby before me, she had no memory. She just wouldn't say anything. So, and even up until, her whole life, she passed away at 77, but she would always sit in the dark. She was a loner. She was not able to focus on reading books or looking at TV or anything really. I mean, she drove, and she was able to go to the bank and get a few groceries at a time, and but unfortunately the marriage was not good. My father had a hard time, so their marriage suffered, and my father, he wouldn't leave her because he didn't want me to be responsible for her care in the future. So he stayed with her. I mean, I know he loved her, in his own way, but he still had to have a life of his own. And growing up, I found this hard. So that's why the families of. I thought, well, I was pretty happy that I received not only a compensation, but the fact that they admitted that this was a true fact was awesome. And so I thought that was the end of it. But then when I started receiving all the other members, people calling me, it started all over again. And now we are a group called Survivors Allied Against Government Abuse, because we are the survivors of those victims, and we have suffered also. To me, I thought it was just a normal childhood, but come to find out, it wasn't. And I know that, there are other people and other people in this world that suffer tremendously from, diseases or, other abuse in the family and everything else that could be out there. And I don't want to be singled out, but it's the fact that my mother went in there thinking, and my family thinking, that she was going to get better and be treated humanely, and she wasn't. And the fact too that I am, I had to pay the lawyer a large sum of money, which I don't really care because I wanted justice, but that money came from my mother's inheritance. So here it's like she was the one that was a victim, and here I am paying for her to get justice after all these years. I'm just hoping that, with this with this story, there might be others out there who don't even know that this has happened. People can go on our site, www.saga.ca, .info.com, and people can read all about it.
And I understand that there was a gag order placed by the government preventing people from speaking out about this.
Yes, preventing me from speaking out about it, because when my case was when I won my case, all the files from the government stay in the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, and there was a reporter who happened to come across my file and noticed that there was a sum paid out from the government to a private person, and involving a lawyer. So she pulled it out and thought, I wonder what this is, because civil people do have the right to know where the government is spending its money. And so she contacted myself and the lawyer and wondered if I would want to share my story. And I was a bit nervous about it because it did say I had to sign something saying that I would not come back on the government or ask for any more, like it was a fait accompli, you might say, and it wasn't to be passed on. In other words, you just don't talk about it. And I guess what the reporter said, they're calling that a gag order. It's almost like a threat. So I was like, gee, I don't know if I should talk about this or not. And my lawyer and the reporter both told me to be rest assured that I could talk about my mother's story openly to anybody I wanted at any time, but just not to talk about how they compensated me. It could have been through an apology. It could have been through anything. I never said anything about that. They were the ones that revealed it.
I see. Oh, so essentially, like the gag order is kind of null and void because it's already a matter of public record?
I hope so. No, that's what they told me, because I know I used to work for a newspaper and I'm familiar with journalists, and if you get you have to get the facts straight. You have to do your homework, and the facts are right. I mean, this story, the government was in fact part of the CIA, working with the CIA, and this story is truly true. And the government had paid out before in the 90s.
And how has this whole lifetime of experience left you feeling about the Canadian government? Or... Well,
to tell you the truth, I hate politics, and I don't know. It seems like you can't trust any of them. But the ironic part that I have to say and stand up for is my father was a Canadian veteran. He died at 93. He was in the Signals, and he fought for our country, Canada. And here we are living in Canada, this free, independent country. To think that my father risked his life along many other Canadian people, and then to think that they're lying to us. We can't trust them, especially with this particular incident. Now, this incident has nothing to do with our immediate government, but the homework needs to be done so that our story, our saga members can be given an apology and to be recognized and to be heard, so that others in the world can know that this sort of thing still goes on. And it's kind of scary.
What do you think the goals were behind this program? Do you think that Dr. Cameron had specific goals for the program, that were different than what the government had in mind?
Well, as far as I know, I believe that the government had heard about him, and he had a funding from the government to set up this ordeal. And the government knew what he was doing, I'm sure, but I don't know what his goal was, really. I know that he died shortly after this was exposed. in the 90s. They said that he had been climbing a mountain or something, and he fell and he died. But I don't know if I believe that or not. I think, I don't know. Because he did perish not too long after this was exposed. So maybe it's a coincidence, I don't know. But there are many, many stories about him. I mean, if you Google Dr. Ewan Cameron, you'd be able to find all the necessary information you'd ever want to know. It's not all pretty, and the thing is what I say too. Not one of those patients that came out of that hospital under his treatments were ever cured. They were only made worse. Not one. You've never heard any good news.
How long was he conducting these experiments for?
Yeah, I believe, our group is saying between 1955 and 1965. It probably went on a bit prior to that, and they do say that he was involved with the Douglas Hospital in Montreal also, and doing the same treatments over there. And also he was working under an umbrella with many other doctors. And so these other doctors were treating their patients under the influence of Cameron's instructions. So it wasn't only Cameron, it was other doctors also. But people would have to have the specific name of the doctor, and it would have to fall into a certain category, and they would have had to be treated at the Allen Memorial Hospital to be involved with our particular case. Because our particular case, it's going to be very, very difficult to get through to the government. So we know our lawyer is going to be helping us, and we know he's the right man.
When is the lawsuit actually taking place? When does the trial go down, or is it still just in the preparation stages at the moment?
Yes, it's in the preparation stages at the moment. People are waiting to get their records. We have on our SAGA information website information on how to get the medical records. We're working with the lawyer from the Allen Memorial Hospital, and he's helping people get their records. It's taking a lot of time. There are little niches here and there, and we're wondering what the holdup is, whether it's them stalling or them not being allowed to. We don't know. So our lawyer is looking into this right at the moment, and as soon as we get enough people, we're hoping for more. We have about maybe 35 or 40 members at the moment that have their records, and we're just hoping we can get a few more. And we're planning on the lawyer is preparing to present our case to the court so that we could receive a certificate saying that they will approve of our class action suit. So we're hoping for October. It was supposed to be September, but we're delaying it a little bit, waiting. So it's all in preparation right now as we speak. If we're accepted, then the lawyer will go ahead and present our case. If we're not accepted, well then I think this is going to be the end of an era. Nobody else will be able to, I doubt it very much that anybody else would ever be able to get through to receive justice or an apology for what's been done in the past.
Oh, well, I really hope you guys get accepted, and I hope you get the justice that you deserve. Thanks so much for sharing your story, Alison. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much.